Every year, religious holidays ripple through the global economy in ways that stretch far beyond rituals and prayers. They shape markets, dictate consumer behavior, and even alter the rhythm of entire nations. When people gather for festivals, celebrations, or days of rest, they are also engaging in one of the oldest economic patterns, a transfer of resources linked to belief systems. Take Christmas, for example. For many, it's presented as a spiritual season, but in practice, it is also one of the largest economic engines of the modern world. Retail sales spike, industries rely on it for survival, and entire business models are built around the surge in spending that happens during these weeks. Some stores make nearly half of their annual revenue in the holiday season alone. Airlines, hotels, logistics companies, and restaurants experience a predictable rise in demand. The religious origins are often overshadowed by the fact that this is now a commercial pillar of the global economy, but Christmas is only the most obvious case. Across cultures, from Ramadan in Muslim-majority countries to Diwali in South Asia, these holidays bring a sudden swell of transactions. Food markets boom, clothing sales skyrocket, travel intensifies, and gifting traditions fuel local economies. In some places, the seasonal demand is so strong that it shapes production cycles months in advance. Farmers, manufacturers, and shop owners plan their year around these surges. The holiday is not only a cultural event, but an economic schedule written into society's calendar. This raises an important question. What happens when belief-driven dates dictate the tempo of economic activity? It means industries adapt not only to natural supply and demand, but also to traditions that carry weight because of faith. This is not inherently good or bad, but it does reveal how deeply economies are tied to rituals that are not chosen rationally but inherited. One of the clearest examples is the tourism industry. Religious holidays generate vast movements of people. Pilgrimages, festival gatherings, and holiday vacations create demand for transportation, accommodation, and hospitality services. Cities with famous shrines or religious landmarks become economic hubs at specific times of the year. Millions of people travel to Mecca for Hajj, generating billions in revenue for Saudi Arabia. Cities like Varanasi in India or Lourdes in France thrive on the influx of pilgrims who bring not only devotion but also wallets filled with spending power. Yet this comes with trade-offs. Infrastructure is strained, prices surge, and locals sometimes find themselves priced out of their own cities during peak religious events. Economies benefit on the surface, but the underlying effects can deepen inequality or fuel exploitation. Seasonal workers are often underpaid despite businesses profiting heavily from these sacred dates. The flow of money isn't equally distributed. There's also the impact on productivity. In countries where religious holidays mean extended closures, the economy slows down, offices shut, factories pause, and trade is delayed. In a globalized world, this can create friction when supply chains rely on regions that observe long religious breaks. While the cultural meaning is celebrated, the economic ripple includes downtime that businesses must strategically absorb. It is no coincidence that corporations lobby governments to reduce or reorganize official holidays in ways that minimize lost output. But there's another side worth examining. The way holidays fuel consumption often pushes societies toward excess. Advertising, gift-giving pressures, and competitive spending spiral far beyond the original purpose of the celebration. In effect, belief-driven traditions are used as levers to keep people buying. This isn't just about retailers seizing an opportunity. It's about entire economies depending on these bursts of irrational consumption. Without them, certain industries would shrink, exposing how dependent the system has become on these cultural cycles. When examined closely, religious holidays act almost like controlled economic shocks. They inject money into circulation, move products faster, and create employment peaks. Yet, because they're built on traditions rather than needs, they also distort what people buy. And when demand is manufactured by expectation, not necessity. From an economic standpoint, this is both powerful and precarious. For instance, consider the environmental cost. During festive seasons, waste increases dramatically.
Packaging, disposable goods, and surplus production leave behind a footprint that is rarely acknowledged. Religious holidays accelerate consumerism in concentrated bursts, and the planet absorbs the fallout. This tension between cultural continuity and ecological sustainability is growing more obvious every year. What feels like a season of generosity often comes with hidden costs borne by ecosystems. It's also important to note how businesses manipulate religious sentiment. Major corporations time product launches, sales campaigns, and marketing strategies to align with these dates. The holidays themselves become monetized to such an extent that the original meaning fades behind a screen of commerce. Even where religion has declined, the economic rhythm of its holidays continues. In countries where fewer people attend religious services, spending around holidays remains high. That persistence shows how the economy, once tied to faith, keeps those patterns alive long after belief itself has weakened. This blending of ritual and commerce shows something striking. Even when belief declines, the economic machinery of religious holidays remains resilient. Retailers, governments, and entire industries have a stake in preserving these dates
because they guarantee spending activity and predictable cash flow. In a way, the sacred becomes secularized not through rejection but through its absorption into the economy. Take Easter, for instance, and for many it's framed around resurrection stories or family gatherings, but for businesses it's about chocolate, seasonal decorations, and themed merchandise. Supermarkets dedicate entire aisles to products that only make sense for a few weeks each year. Candy companies rely heavily on Easter for revenue, in the same way toy companies rely on Christmas. Over time, the commercial side outgrows the spiritual one, and people participate in traditions less because of faith and more because of cultural habit reinforced by marketing. This pattern is not limited to Christian-majority regions. In South Asia, Diwali lights up the economy with massive spending on clothing, jewelry, sweets, and fireworks. Families often go into debt to live up to social expectations of gifting and celebration. Banks and lenders even design special financial products tailored to these holidays, encouraging loans to fuel seasonal consumption. What began as a religious festival becomes a cycle of debt and repayment that stretches far beyond the sacred calendar. Ramadan offers another example. During this month, the rhythm of daily life changes, with fasting during daylight hours followed by nightly feasts. Markets adapt to these cycles, with food sales rising dramatically after sunset. Advertising campaigns shift to reflect themes of generosity and family. The economy bends around a spiritual discipline, but not always in ways that reflect moderation. In many places, household spending during Ramadan is significantly higher than in other months, highlighting how religion, economy, and consumerism are entangled. If we look deeper, we can see how these patterns expose an underlying paradox. Religious holidays often preach simplicity, reflection, or spiritual renewal, yet the economic structures surrounding them push toward indulgence, excess, and debt. This contradiction is not accidental. It is the result of industries learning how to profit from cultural rhythms and reshaping them to maximize spending. Governments also benefit from these holidays in ways that aren't always obvious. Tax revenue increases during spending surges, boosting public coffers. Seasonal employment rises, temporarily reducing unemployment rates. Public transportation systems earn more, and cities collect fees from markets, permits, and services linked to celebrations. In many ways, states have as much interest as businesses in maintaining these cycles because they stabilize revenue flows. The sacred becomes a fiscal asset. However, this comes at a social cost. In places where wealth inequality is already stark, religious holidays magnify it. Families with limited means feel pressured to keep up with spending patterns they can't afford. The result is emotional and financial strain hidden beneath the surface of joy. Banks, credit cards, and loan agencies capitalize on this, ensuring that the burden of celebration falls hardest on those least equipped to bear it. In this sense, the economic impact of religious holidays is not neutral. It redistributes wealth upward, allowing corporations and lenders to thrive while many individuals are left struggling. There's also the question of lost productivity during extended religious breaks. In countries with numerous religious holidays, businesses face higher operational costs, and global investors sometimes perceive them as less efficient. This can influence how international corporations choose where to invest or build supply chains. When holidays are numerous and unpredictable, they become an economic liability. This tension often leads to governments reducing or consolidating religious days of rest to align with economic goals. The result is a compromise where faith adapts to markets, not the other way around. Cultural identity also plays a role here. Religious holidays are powerful tools for reinforcing a sense of belonging, but they're equally powerful at reinforcing consumer identities. The decorations, the food, the shopping rituals, all of these are packaged and sold. Children are taught traditions less through sacred texts and more through seasonal advertisements, special foods, and themed products. The economy keeps belief alive by embedding it in consumer memory. A child who grows up associating joy with holiday shopping may carry that habit into adulthood, long after they've left behind the actual religious doctrine. In this way, religious holidays shape economies, but economies also shape religious holidays. The relationship is circular. Belief creates a market, and the market redefines the belief. Eventually, the celebration remains even if the faith diminishes, because the economic rewards are too great to abandon. This is why in increasingly secular societies, holidays tied to religion still dominate calendars. They've been transformed into economic engines too valuable to discard. The entertainment industry provides yet another layer. Holiday films, music, and televised events generate billions in revenue each year. Whole genres of media depend on seasonal demand. This isn't spirituality at work, it's cultural programming for profit. And Holiday Movie Marathon is not about preserving doctrine, it's about filling advertising slots and selling merchandise. This demonstrates again how the sacred and the economic are inseparable once commercial logic takes over. Another striking dimension of the economic impact of religious holidays is how they reshape labor markets. Retail workers, delivery drivers, hospitality staff, and service employees often bear the brunt of holiday seasons. While many people celebrate or rest, others work. Longer hours, under greater stress. The festive spirit is sustained by invisible labor, often underpaid and undervalued. These cycles reveal a kind of hierarchy where the joy of some is supported by the exhaustion of others. For example, in Western countries, the weeks leading up to Christmas are notorious for harsh working conditions in warehouses, delivery services, and retail stores. Temporary contracts surge, offering short-term jobs but without long-term security. Workers face intense pressure to meet demand, often under conditions that compromise their health and dignity. The very holiday that is framed around generosity and goodwill becomes, for many, a season of burnout and economic exploitation. This pattern is mirrored across the globe. During Diwali, garment workers in South Asia often endure extra shifts to meet the spike in clothing demand. In the Middle East, food production and service workers absorb the increased consumption linked to Ramadan nights. The economic boom tied to these holidays does not distribute benefits evenly. It often flows upward to business owners, while workers carry the heaviest load. Tourism workers experience something similar. Cities known for religious festivals or pilgrimages hire large numbers of seasonal staff to accommodate visitors, but these jobs vanish once the crowds leave. Income becomes unpredictable, tied to the calendar rather than stable employment. For individuals and families relying on this income, life is structured around peaks and valleys dictated not by economic rationality, but by inherited traditions. There's also the matter of inflated pricing during these holidays. As demand spikes, businesses raise prices on travel, food, and accommodation. What could be a time of rest or gathering instead becomes a financial burden. Flights around Christmas, hotel rooms during major pilgrimages, or even basic goods during festive seasons often cost far more than usual. This price inflation deepens the divide between those who can afford the holiday experience and those who cannot. In this sense, religion-driven events do not only stimulate the economy, they also act as barriers that reinforce economic inequality. At the same time, governments and corporations deliberately cultivate this dependence on religious holiday cycles. Advertising builds emotional associations between holidays and consumption.
people are encouraged to express love, generosity, or devotion through purchases. The language of spirituality becomes intertwined with the language of commerce, so much so that resisting the spending pressure feels almost like breaking a social norm. This is one of the strongest economic impacts of religious holidays, the power to standardize mass consumption. The ripple effect is also seen in education and public infrastructure. School calendars in many countries are built around religious holidays, shaping how families organize.
Their time and spending, public transportation schedules are altered with extra services added or routes adjusted to accommodate holiday travel. Even law enforcement and healthcare systems plan around these surges, because large gatherings often bring increased accidents, illnesses, or emergencies. All of these shifts require resources that are justified not by economic efficiency, but by cultural expectation. One fascinating aspect is how secular industries borrow religious holidays to anchor their own cycles. Sales events are timed to coincide with them. Black Friday, though not itself religious, is strategically tied to the Thanksgiving-Christmas window. In India, electronics and car companies release major deals around Diwali. In the Middle East, telecom and banking promotions peak during Ramadan. What began as religious observances become platforms for corporate marketing. Without these anchor points, companies would have to generate consumer excitement in other ways. There's also the matter of long-term consequences. When societies pour enormous resources into cyclical surges of consumption, they can neglect more sustainable patterns of growth. Businesses may become dependent on holiday booms, failing to innovate or diversify. When demand outside those periods weakens, entire industries can wobble. This dependence makes economies fragile. If, for any reason, participation in a holiday declines, the economic gap is felt sharply. For example, a decline in Christmas participation in certain regions has caused panic in retail markets, as if the absence of religiously timed spending threatens economic stability itself. From another angle, holidays are sometimes used by governments as tools of soft control. By promoting large-scale religious celebrations, authorities can stimulate consumption, distract from political issues, or strengthen social cohesion in ways that serve national interests. Economic surges are presented as signs of prosperity, even if the benefits are unevenly distributed. The blending of politics, religion, and economics becomes clearer during these orchestrated holidays, where national image and revenue take precedence over personal belief. In effect, religious holidays serve as levers. They can push economies forward, but they can also trap people in cycles of debt, inequality, and overwork. They can reinforce tradition, but also strip it of its deeper meaning by converting it into a recurring sales opportunity. The sacred is not just hidden beneath the commercial, it is often consumed by it. Looking closer at the economic dimension of religious holidays, we can see how entire industries have become synchronized with these cultural rhythms. Retail, food, tourism, entertainment, finance, all rely on the predictable spikes in demand. This synchronization creates stability for some sectors, but it also locks them into patterns that discourage flexibility. And business that depends on one or two religious holidays for its yearly profit margin is vulnerable if participation changes. In this way, faith traditions effectively hold certain parts of the economy hostage. The financial industry is a prime example. Credit card companies and banks see religious holidays as golden opportunities. Spending surges often outstrip household income, leading to higher reliance on loans and credit. Interest payments collected in the months that follow become a quiet but steady source of profit. Religious traditions, while framed as celebrations of family and community, are also engines of personal debt that benefit financial institutions. And the irony is that many of these traditions emphasize moderation or generosity, yet their modern expression produces financial strain for ordinary people. Insurance companies also capitalize on these patterns. Holiday travel means higher risk, so policies are sold at higher rates. Large gatherings mean increased health risks, so medical coverage is marketed more aggressively. Even life insurance sales spike in anticipation of major religious events, fueled by campaigns that mix emotional appeal with financial pressure. Once again, the sacred becomes monetized through carefully designed products.
Beyond finance, the entertainment industry thrives on the emotional pull of religious holidays. Streaming services release themed content, knowing that families will gather and watch together. Music industries resurface seasonal songs year after year, profiting from nostalgia that is tied not only to belief, but to repeated economic behavior. Theater productions, parades, and concerts generate additional revenue, supported by public funding in many cases. These activities are less about doctrine and more about cultural spectacle, but they are anchored in traditions originally framed as sacred. Then there is the global trade element. Many products associated with religious holidays are manufactured months in advance, often in countries far removed from the traditions themselves. Christmas decorations produced in China, Ramadan lanterns exported from Egypt, Diwali lights made in factories scattered across Asia. The chain is global, and it illustrates how belief-based practices have become inseparable from international supply networks. The sacred, once local, has been transformed into a global commodity. This globalization also introduces vulnerabilities. Delays in shipping, shortages of raw materials, or disruptions in labor markets can ripple into holiday seasons, creating consumer frustration and economic instability. When shipping containers back up in ports, it isn't just electronics or furniture that are delayed, it's Christmas ornaments, Ramadan treats, or Easter products. Faith-driven consumption has become part of the fragile web of global trade, dependent on systems that were never designed with spirituality in mind.
Technology companies play their part as well. Online shopping platforms experience massive spikes during holiday seasons. E-commerce giants design entire promotional calendars around religiously influenced dates. Algorithms push targeted ads, amplifying pressure to buy. Even digital payment platforms experience record traffic during these seasons, turning sacred times into benchmarks for technological growth. Behind every festive campaign is a massive data operation tracking consumer habits and reinforcing cycles of spending. Yet amidst all this economic activity, it's worth asking, who benefits most? While businesses, banks, and governments extract enormous value, the burden often falls on households. Families adjust budgets, cut corners, or take on debt to keep up with cultural expectations. The cycle of giving and celebration becomes one of obligation and strain. And because these obligations are tied to sacred tradition, resisting them feels socially dangerous. Economic pressure hides behind the language of devotion and belonging. Another overlooked impact is environmental. Religious holidays magnify consumption in concentrated bursts, which amplifies waste. Think of the discarded wrapping paper, plastic decorations, leftover food, and mass-produced goods that end up in landfills. The environmental cost is staggering, yet rarely addressed because the holidays are shielded by cultural and religious importance. To question the wastefulness of holidays is often seen as questioning the holiday itself. And so, industries continue producing disposable goods in the name of tradition while ecosystems absorb the damage. There's also the role of small businesses. On one hand, holidays provide them with opportunities to thrive, especially through markets and local events. On the other, they struggle to compete with larger corporations that dominate advertising and supply chains. Street vendors may enjoy increased sales during pilgrimages or festivals, but they also face higher competition, fluctuating prices, and dependency on unpredictable crowds. For many small businesses, holidays are not a guaranteed windfall, but a risky gamble. Taken together, these dynamics highlight a central truth. Religious holidays are not simply spiritual observances with incidental economic effects. They are structural features of economies, shaping labor, finance, trade, and consumption. They influence when people spend, how much they spend, and what industries rise or fall. And while they bring moments of joy and community, they also create cycles of inequality, debt, and waste. Religious holidays also reveal the tension between tradition and modernization in the economy. In many societies, governments and businesses struggle to balance respect for cultural heritage with the pressures of global competitiveness. Long religious breaks can clash with the demands of international trade, yet shortening or altering them can spark public backlash. This delicate balance shows how deeply economics and tradition are entangled.
Neither side can fully escape the other. One telling example is the way multinational corporations adapt differently across regions. A global company will market Christmas products in Europe and North America, Diwali promotions in India, and Ramadan offers in the Middle East. Their entire marketing infrastructure is designed to localize belief-driven consumption. What looks like cultural respect is often a calculated economic move. Corporations don't preserve holidays out of devotion, but because they are highly efficient tools for generating revenue. The airline industry demonstrates this vividly. Flight prices rise dramatically around Christmas, Eid, and other major holidays. Airlines justify these surges as supply and demand, but in practice, they exploit predictable cultural movements. Families who want to reunite during sacred times must pay inflated costs, essentially turning devotion into an economic burden. The same pattern applies to hotels and transport companies. The desire to participate in religious traditions is transformed into a source of premium profit. Meanwhile, workplaces feel the strain of holiday clustering. Productivity slows as employees prepare for celebrations and absenteeism rises. In regions with multiple religious groups, businesses must navigate a patchwork of holidays, each with its own economic effects. This creates inefficiencies that companies must plan for, often by adjusting output cycles or stockpiling in advance. The workplace bends to tradition, even if the workforce itself has become more secular. In the educational sphere, the economic effects ripple further. Extended school holidays mean shifts in childcare demands. Parents often turn to camps, courses, or temporary care arrangements, creating seasonal industries that exist solely because of religious calendars. For wealthier families, this is manageable. For poorer households, it can become a financial strain. Once again, belief-driven schedules impose costs that are unevenly distributed. Cultural exports also shape global economies through religious holidays. Consider how Christmas has spread far beyond Christian-majority countries. Japan, for instance, celebrates Christmas largely as a commercial event with little religious content. The holiday has been repackaged into a romantic, consumer-driven occasion that benefits restaurants, gift shops, and entertainment industries. What began as a religious observance has been stripped of doctrine and remade into pure economic ritual. The same can be seen with Halloween, originally tied to Christian and pagan traditions, now globalized as a commercial festival with almost no spiritual content. This transformation highlights how religious holidays evolve into cultural products once their economic potential becomes clear. Their survival often depends less on faith and more on profitability. If a holiday generates enough revenue, it will persist and even spread, regardless of whether belief remains strong. The economy becomes the custodian of tradition, ensuring its continuation not through devotion, but through commerce. Another layer worth examining is how holidays reinforce consumer psychology. People are conditioned to expect sales, rewards, or gifts at specific times of the year. This expectation alters behavior even outside the holiday season. For instance, many people postpone purchases because they anticipate discounts linked to religious festivals. Companies manipulate this psychology to regulate demand. Consumers, in turn, internalize it as natural. What feels like tradition is in fact economic conditioning tied to cultural symbols. Interestingly, not all holidays stimulate economies in the same way. Some are centered on fasting, austerity, or solemnity. These, too, have economic consequences. For example, during Lent in many Christian traditions, certain food industries decline, while others adapt by promoting alternatives. During Ramadan, daytime food sales drop, only to surge at night. These fluctuations reshape markets, requiring agility from producers and sellers. What appears to be purely spiritual discipline is, in practice, an economic reshuffling. The digital economy has amplified these effects. Social media platforms are flooded with holiday-related content, sponsored posts, and targeted ads. Influencers play a major role in shaping how people celebrate, turning rituals into performance for online audiences. Businesses exploit this trend, embedding their products into holiday narratives. Digital platforms, in turn, profit from the advertising surge,
The sacred enters the algorithm, where it is repackaged into engagement metrics and ad revenue. Finally, the symbolic power of holidays gives them political weight. Leaders often tie themselves to major celebrations, appearing at festivals, or making speeches that frame the holiday as a symbol of national unity. These appearances are rarely without economic intent. They stimulate consumption, reinforce state authority, and maintain social stability by linking tradition with prosperity. The holiday becomes a stage not just for faith, but for economic and political messaging. When all of these layers are considered, the picture becomes clear. Religious holidays are not side effects in the economy. They are central engines that shape how societies spend, work, rest, and even think. Their impact reaches from the household budget to global trade networks, from cultural psychology to environmental sustainability. And while they are wrapped in sacred language, the economic reality often dominates, steering traditions into cycles of profit, inequality, and consumption. One of the most revealing aspects of the economic role of religious holidays is how they often act as reset buttons for consumption. They create artificial peaks in demand that break the monotony of ordinary markets. Without these peaks, economies might face slower, steadier growth, but the surges keep the system dynamic. This isn't by accident. Governments and corporations understand that these moments of concentrated spending keep industries alive. The calendar of belief is also the calendar of profit. Think about how advertising builds anticipation for these events. Months before Christmas, entire marketing campaigns flood screens and streets. Diwali promotions start weeks in advance, shaping what families feel they need to buy. Ramadan campaigns highlight generosity through purchases rather than restraint. These long lead-ins extend the economic life of holidays, making them far more than single days of observance. They become seasons of spending, and the infrastructure around these holidays reflects their economic gravity. In some countries, entire manufacturing towns exist primarily to supply holiday goods. Villages in China produce ornaments. Factories in India specialize in Diwali lights. Workshops in Mexico craft Day of the Dead decorations. For these communities, religious holidays elsewhere in the world are lifelines of employment. It is a striking example of how local economies are tethered to global belief systems, even when the workers themselves may not share in the traditions they produce for. This also shows how holidays reinforce cycles of dependency. Workers producing holiday goods often receive low wages, yet the demand for their products keeps them employed. The global economy relies on these patterns, ensuring that belief continues to be commodified on a massive scale. Consumers celebrate, but workers halfway across the world carry the economic weight of that celebration. The sacred and the laboring body are bound together in a chain of supply and demand. There is another angle worth noting: the way holidays shape financial planning at the household level. Families often save throughout the year in anticipation of major holidays. This shifts personal finance into a cycle where economic decisions are made not for rational utility, but for cultural obligation. People prioritize spending on holiday gifts or feasts over investments in education, healthcare, or long-term stability. This diversion of resources demonstrates how deeply tradition shapes not just collective economies, but private financial lives. Some households, unable to save enough, turn to credit, and this is particularly evident during expensive holidays like Christmas or weddings tied to religious calendars. Debt accumulates not because families desire luxury, but because cultural expectation demands participation. Opting out feels like exclusion from community. In this way, religious holidays perpetuate cycles of debt that financial institutions Eagerly monetize. The calendar of belief becomes the calendar of repayment. At the same time, the informal economy flourishes around these dates. Street vendors, small artisans, and local markets experience bursts of activity. While corporations dominate large-scale trade, small businesses benefit from the community spirit that brings people outdoors, eager to spend. These microeconomies are often fragile, but they highlight the grassroots side of holiday economics. Festivals create spaces where local traditions, crafts, and foods temporarily thrive. Yet once the holiday ends, these opportunities vanish, leaving communities in uncertainty until the next cycle. One could argue that holidays act as a form of cultural economic redistribution. Money flows from households into businesses, from rural producers into urban markets, from small shops into large corporations, but this redistribution is uneven, tilted toward those who control production and marketing. The result is not a balanced sharing of prosperity, but a concentration of wealth that accelerates during periods of heightened consumption. The sacred occasions become accelerators of inequality. The environmental costs also continue to mount. Festivals that rely on fireworks, mass travel, or disposable goods leave behind significant pollution. Cities choke on smoke after Diwali, beaches fill with trash after holiday tourism, forests shrink to make way for paper and packaging. Governments often excuse these spikes in pollution as cultural exceptions, reluctant to impose restrictions for fear of political backlash. The result is a cycle where the planet pays the hidden price of faith-driven economies. Technology adds yet another layer of complexity. With online shopping dominating holiday consumption, entire logistics networks expand and contract around these dates. Warehouses hire temporary staff, delivery services stretch their capacity, and digital platforms record unprecedented traffic. For tech companies, holidays are stress tests that also deliver massive revenue. They measure success not in terms of spiritual fulfillment, but in clicks, sales, and data harvested from consumer behavior. The sacred becomes data points, stored and analyzed to refine the next cycle of consumption. And yet beneath all this economic machinery, one cannot ignore the psychological side. Religious holidays create powerful emotional triggers. Nostalgia, belonging, and tradition are intertwined with spending habits. People are not simply buying products. They are buying memories, identities, and acceptance within their communities. This emotional economy is perhaps the most significant impact of all. It explains why these holidays remain so economically potent even in secular societies. The belief may fade, but the emotional pull tied to family and memory ensures that consumption continues. The emotional economy tied to religious holidays explains why they are so resistant to change. People don't simply see them as days on a calendar. They feel them as markers of life, moments where the year pivots. Businesses understand this and build entire strategies around reinforcing these feelings. Advertising doesn't just sell products, it sells belonging, togetherness, and tradition, values that are nearly impossible to resist because they reach deeper than rational calculation. This is why, even in societies where religious participation is declining, the economic force of these holidays remains strong. The emotional pull survives long after the belief fades. A person may no longer pray or attend services, but they still buy gifts, decorate homes, or travel to see family. The marketplace ensures continuity, even when faith no longer drives the ritual. The economy, in effect, keeps the holiday alive by attaching it to emotion rather than devotion. There's another interesting contradiction here. Many religious holidays were originally meant to challenge materialism, to remind people of values beyond wealth. Yet in practice, they often produce the exact opposite, a frenzy of spending, hoarding, and showing off. What was once about reflection or gratitude becomes about spectacle. Families stretch themselves financially, not to honor belief, but to keep up with social expectation, and corporations, of course, are more than willing to fuel this inversion. The scale of marketing tied to holidays illustrates how deeply they drive economies. From global corporations launching new product lines to local shops offering seasonal discounts, every sector tries to secure a piece of the holiday surge. Advertising budgets peak during these times, making holidays some of the most profitable periods for media companies. Television, radio, online platforms, and print all benefit. The holiday spirit becomes a cash cow for industries far removed from the traditions themselves. Even the workplace culture reflects these patterns. Bonuses are often tied to holidays, reinforcing the sense that financial reward and celebration are linked. Employers use these occasions to motivate or pacify workers, distributing symbolic rewards while reinforcing loyalty.
This isn't generosity in a spiritual sense, in its strategy, a way of binding labor more tightly to the rhythms of corporate profit cycles. The sacred here becomes a management tool. The political dimension should not be overlooked either. In many countries, leaders use holidays to showcase national identity and unity. Large public celebrations are staged not only for religious or cultural reasons, but to project an image of prosperity and stability. These spectacles cost millions, funded by public money, justified as tradition but often designed for political gain. The economic impact here is dual, stimulating industries while reinforcing state power through carefully
Curated pageantry. It's also worth considering how the clustering of holidays affects long-term planning. For businesses, the year is not a smooth line of growth, but a jagged pattern of spikes and troughs. This complicates supply chains, labor management, and financial forecasting. Entire industries become cyclical, rising during holidays and shrinking afterward. This fragility makes them vulnerable to disruptions. If a crisis coincides with the holiday season, the economic shock can be severe. The pandemic made this clear when lockdowns struck during Easter, Ramadan, and Diwali, leaving industries that relied on these peaks scrambling to survive. This dependency reveals an uncomfortable truth. The global economy, despite its complexity and rational design, still bends to the rhythms of inherited tradition. Faith may no longer govern the state, but its calendar still governs spending patterns, supply chains, and labor cycles. The sacred has not disappeared from economic life. It has been transformed into a structural necessity. Meanwhile, inequality continues to grow under the surface. Wealthier households treat holidays as opportunities for comfort and indulgence. Poorer households face the same social pressures, but with fewer resources, often leading to debt and hardship. The gap widens each holiday season as businesses reap profits while many families struggle just to participate. In this sense, holidays act as magnifiers of inequality, dressed in the language of joy. The environmental burden grows heavier with each cycle, too. The pressure to consume leads to overproduction, mass waste, and significant carbon emissions from travel. Seasonal surges intensify already unsustainable economic practices, and yet these issues are rarely addressed seriously because holidays are seen as untouchable. To question them is to risk appearing insensitive to tradition. The environment remains the silent casualty of belief-driven consumption. And still, the machine continues. Religious holidays keep the wheels of the economy turning in ways that benefit the powerful. They provide predictable patterns, emotional leverage, and consumer compliance. They blur the line between devotion and obligation, making it hard to tell where faith ends and commerce begins. For many, the holiday is less about belief than about participation in a ritual of spending that feels unavoidable. The dependency of economies on religious holidays also shapes how time itself is organized. Workers, students, and even governments orient their schedules around these moments, creating a rhythm where productivity and rest are dictated not by efficiency but by inherited cultural dates. Time becomes structured by belief, even for those who no longer share it. The holiday calendar becomes a kind of invisible architecture holding societies together economically, whether or not people are consciously aware of it. This shaping of time reveals why attempts to replace or minimize holidays often fail. When governments try to reduce the number of days off to boost productivity, they encounter public resistance. The backlash isn't always about faith. It's about identity, tradition, and the expectation of rest and togetherness. In economic terms, people defend holidays because they represent rare windows of collective pause. Ironically, though, these pauses are also when spending peaks, so the economy keeps moving even as work stops. But not all economic effects are positive. When entire countries shut down during extended religious holidays, trade disruptions ripple outward. International partners face delays, supply chains slow, and markets lose momentum. These inefficiencies cost billions globally, yet they persist because no government wants to risk being seen as hostile to tradition. This illustrates how cultural weight can outweigh economic logic, binding nations to practices that sometimes hinder their competitiveness. And yet, the persistence of these holidays in secular economies highlights a subtle truth. Once a holiday becomes economically useful, it rarely disappears. Even if belief fades, the commercial momentum keeps it alive. Christmas in largely secular societies, Halloween in countries with little connection to its origins, or Valentine's Day reshaped as a quasi-religious ritual of love. All of these persist because they generate reliable streams of revenue. The sacred survives as long as it pays. Consider how the hospitality industry thrives during these times. Hotels, restaurants, and catering services see massive spikes, often planning their entire business model around holiday peaks. Some restaurants survive lean months because of a single festival season. Others collapse if a holiday season is disrupted. The sacred calendar functions like an economic safety net for some and a trap for others. The real estate sector also benefits indirectly. Holidays often coincide with family gatherings where discussions of dowries, weddings, or home buying take place. Developers time promotions to coincide with these family-centric occasions, understanding that financial decisions are easier to push when cultural expectations are already high. Homes are bought, loans are signed, and future debt is sealed during moments framed as sacred or communal. One more overlooked dimension is how religious holidays influence migration and remittances. Migrant workers often send extra money home during festivals to help families afford celebrations. This creates a predictable flow of remittances that many developing economies rely on. For entire nations, religious holidays abroad become lifelines of income. The sacred rituals in one country ripple into the financial survival of another. Globalization turns faith into currency flows. The media reinforces this cycle relentlessly. Holiday theme. Programming saturates television, streaming platforms, and even news coverage. Every year, the same stories, movies, and songs resurface, not because they are timeless, but because they are profitable. Nostalgia is repackaged as tradition, ensuring that people return to the same consumption patterns year after year. The media acts as the memory keeper of the holiday, embedding it in the culture whether or not the original belief remains. Charity, too, becomes part of this economic cycle. Many religious holidays emphasize giving, and indeed, charitable donations spike during these times. But even this altruism is entangled with commerce. Nonprofits run aggressive fundraising campaigns during festivals, knowing people are more willing to give. Companies encourage donations through their platforms, often taking a cut or using the gesture to burnish their public image. Acts of generosity become opportunities for branding and revenue. And yet, beneath all this commercial energy, there's always the reminder of contradiction. The original intent of many of these holidays, reflection, restraint, gratitude, humility, is often drowned out by the pressure to buy more, spend more, show more. What remains is a cycle that claims to be sacred, but functions largely as an engine of profit. People may feel spiritually fulfilled, but the economic structure ensures that fulfillment is inseparable from consumption. Ultimately, what religious holidays reveal is that economies are not as secular as they appear. They are built around cultural inheritances that remain powerful precisely because they are emotionally charged. Markets may not need doctrine, but they thrive on ritual. And as long as tradition continues to provide reliable spikes in spending, the sacred and the economic will remain intertwined in ways that are difficult to separate. Another revealing feature of religious holidays is how they drive competition between industries. Companies fight fiercely to capture consumer attention during these concentrated windows of spending. Toy manufacturers clash with electronics companies over Christmas budgets. Clothing retailers battle jewelers and sweet shops during Diwali. Food producers and advertisers race to dominate Ramadan nights. Each industry tries to tie itself to the emotional heart of the holiday, knowing that whoever succeeds secures a disproportionate share of revenue. This competitive frenzy often shapes culture itself. New traditions are invented not through faith, but through marketing. The idea of Santa Claus as a red-suited gift giver was popularized by corporations, reshaping global culture in the process. Similarly, mass-produced greeting cards, fireworks, or holiday-specific foods have been branded into cultural memory. Over time, these manufactured traditions feel as authentic as the religious ones they were built upon.
The sacred is rewritten by advertising.
And once these commercial versions take root, they rarely disappear. They become part of the economic ecosystem, defended not for their religious significance, but for their profitability. Cultural identity becomes inseparable from corporate invention. People may feel they are preserving tradition when they decorate a tree, light fireworks, or exchange sweets, but in reality, they are also participating in rituals designed to fuel consumption. The holiday evolves to serve the economy first, belief second. Tourism provides another striking example. Cities and countries brand themselves around their religious festivals to attract global visitors. Brazil markets Carnival. India promotes Holi and Diwali. Saudi Arabia invests heavily in Hajj infrastructure. These events become spectacles not only of faith, but of national pride and economic strategy. Governments pour resources into making them bigger, brighter, and more profitable. The sacred is staged for an audience, its value measured in ticket sales and hotel bookings. But the tourism model has drawbacks. Local communities often pay the price through overcrowding, environmental degradation, and rising costs of living. A city may earn billions from tourism during a festival, but its residents may find their streets unusable, their rents inflated, and their neighborhoods reshaped for visitors rather than locals. The economic boom, in other words, comes with hidden costs that are unevenly distributed. Meanwhile, global corporations seize on these festivals to insert themselves into local economies. International brands sponsor parades, concerts, and events, positioning themselves as part of the tradition. What might once have been a community gathering becomes a corporate spectacle. Local cultures are commodified, packaged, and sold to tourists and consumers alike. The holiday, once sacred, becomes a platform for global capitalism. There is also the subtle way religious holidays enforce conformity in spending. Those who cannot or do not participate risk being excluded from community life. A family unable to afford gifts during Christmas or new clothes during Eid feels the weight of social judgment. Economic participation becomes a proxy for belonging. In this way, holidays reinforce not only consumption, but also the pressure to conform. Social cohesion is maintained, but at the expense of individual financial freedom. Another overlooked effect is the strain on public services. Hospitals see spikes in admissions during festivals linked to overeating, drinking, or fireworks. Law enforcement faces challenges with large gatherings, traffic, and accidents. Public transport networks are stretched beyond capacity. These costs are rarely included in calculations of holiday economic benefit, but they are real and significant. The state spends heavily to manage risks that are byproducts of celebration. Interestingly, secular holidays modeled on religious ones often replicate the same economic effects. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day, all relatively modern inventions, have become enormous drivers of spending. They mimic the structure of religious holidays, emotional symbolism, cultural expectation, and commercial opportunity. This shows that what matters economically is not doctrine, but ritual. If people can be persuaded that a date is meaningful, the economy can turn it into profit. And this leads to an uncomfortable realization. Many holidays survive not because of belief or community need, but because of the money they generate. If they ceased to be profitable, they would fade. The fact that so many persist even in secular contexts proves that their economic role has overtaken their religious one. Faith gave them birth, but commerce ensures their survival. The cycle is self-reinforcing. People spend because they expect others to spend. Businesses expand because they know people will spend. And governments support the cycle because it produces tax revenue. The ritual continues not out of necessity, but out of momentum. Tradition and economy have fused so tightly that untangling them is nearly impossible. The self-reinforcing cycle of religious holidays and economic activity reveals something deeper about human behavior. People often act as though these celebrations are essential, not because they are required for survival, but because the culture and the economy that profits from it makes them feel unavoidable. To resist the cycle is to risk social alienation, while to participate is to accept the economic cost. In this way, belief-driven holidays become instruments of social and financial control, whether consciously designed or not. The role of advertising here cannot be overstated. Marketing doesn't simply remind people of holidays, it expands them. Christmas now stretches across months, beginning with sales in October. Ramadan is commercialized with pre-fasting campaigns. Diwali promotions begin weeks before the actual festival. The sacred is stretched to maximize profits, turning isolated dates into extended economic seasons. This elongation benefits businesses, but it also amplifies pressure on families to spend over a longer period. And once these patterns are entrenched, they create entire industries of dependency. Shipping companies hire thousands of seasonal workers, warehouses build special infrastructure, and retailers expand inventories just for these limited windows. If holiday demand falters, these sectors suffer. The economy becomes tied to belief not out of necessity, but out of habit, locking itself into cycles that are difficult to escape. What's fascinating is that the same cycle operates even when the religious meaning disappears. Halloween today has little to do with its original roots, yet it generates billions in costumes, decorations, and candy sales. Japan, Christmas is celebrated more as a commercial and romantic event than a religious one, but businesses thrive nonetheless. This demonstrates that the economic machine doesn't need faith, only ritual. If people perform the motions, the profits flow, regardless of doctrine. Governments often report the holiday boost in GDP as a sign of prosperity, but these short-term spikes can obscure long-term weaknesses. They encourage economies to lean heavily on seasonal spending instead of developing more balanced, sustainable growth models. In other words, reliance on religious holidays as economic drivers can create fragility. When shocks like recessions, pandemics, or political unrest disrupt the holiday season, the impact is far worse than in economies less dependent on such cycles. At the same time, these cycles reveal the adaptability of capitalism. Whatever the tradition, it can be reinterpreted in economic terms. Feasting becomes a food industry boom, fasting becomes a marketing opportunity for evening meals, devotion becomes tourism, generosity becomes fundraising campaigns. The system has a remarkable ability to absorb and repurpose traditions, ensuring nothing remains outside the reach of profit. The sacred becomes raw material for the marketplace. For individuals, this creates a strange double life. On the surface, holidays are framed as moments of rest, reflection, or family unity. Beneath that surface, they are moments of intense economic participation, often more stressful than restorative. Families spend weeks preparing, shopping, cooking, and organizing, leaving little time for genuine rest. The economy thrives, but individuals are left exhausted, financially stretched, and emotionally drained. This contradiction is sharpened when one looks at the environmental and social costs. The surge in waste, energy use, and overproduction that accompanies holidays contribute significantly to global crises. Yet, because these costs are diffused and delayed, they are rarely part of the discussion. Instead, the focus remains on immediate economic benefits. GDP rises, retail sales break records, and corporations celebrate profits, while the planet silently absorbs the damage. And the cycle continues because questioning it is taboo. To challenge the economic excess of a holiday is often seen as attacking the holiday itself, or worse, the faith tied to it. This protective shield allows industries to continue practices that would be criticized in any other context. Overconsumption is tolerated, even celebrated, as long as it is wrapped in the language of tradition. What this reveals is not just the economic power of religious holidays, but their role as cultural blind spots. They are moments when critical thought is suspended, when society collectively agrees to ignore the costs in favor of maintaining ritual. In that sense, holidays are not just economic drivers, but also instruments of distraction, redirecting attention from deeper issues by focusing it on consumption disguised as celebration.